Part 3, Self-Hating Jews. Who's up? Norman Finkelstein. Everybody's been telling me to cover Norman Finkelstein, so I decided to go to YouTube and look him up. And what do I find? He's getting millions of views. So I looked into the comments section to see what people are saying, and wow, several people calling him a hero, people telling him that he should win the Nobel Peace Prize. Sounds pretty good, right? So why don't we take a look?
Everyone in Israel is either a war criminal or a vicarious war criminal. I do not believe it's established as a fact that babies were beheaded or rapes had occurred. The evidence on the first is zero. The evidence on the second, namely the rapes, approaches zero.
Your first reaction to what happened on October the 7th incensed many people. You posted on Substack, and it included this: for the past 20 years, the people of Gaza, half of whom are children, have been immured in a concentration camp. Today they breach the camp's walls. If we honour John Brown's armed resistance to slavery, if we honour the Jews who revolted in the Warsaw Ghetto, the moral consistency commands that we honour the heroic resistance in Gaza. I, for one, will never begrudge. On the contrary, it warms every fibre of my soul. The scenes of Gaza's smiling children as their arrogant Jewish supremacist oppressors have finally been humbled. And you ended by saying, the stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. Glory, glory, hallelujah. The souls of Gaza go marching on. And you then added at 9:16 that you felt the hostage situation was crocodile tears. But you want me to believe you when you say you weren't aware of the scale of this for several days. I find that I'm incredulous that you want me to believe that.
Okay, I should think that there would be some mercy shown because those who carried out the atrocities were concentration camp inmates. You ask me why I won't condemn them. Because those young men were born into a concentration camp.
I'm honestly speechless at what he says next. Speechless.
Talking about those 1,500 young men who were killed after they burst the gates of Gaza. Are they just blind followers of Hamas orders? Young men who were born into a concentration camp, the rage inside them. Let's talk about the people, the 1,500 young men who nobody gives a darn about. Everybody talks about the 1,400 Israelis who were killed. No evidence that Hamas engaged in human shielding.
Wait, hold on, Norman. I'm not so sure about that. So as always, I like to bring in one of my own experts.
بقول لك بشكل واضح احنا اسمنا شعب الشهداء ونفخر ان نقدم شهداء.
Okay, Norm, by all means, let's continue with your diatribe of vile lies and nonsense.
But you know who's conducting the human shielding? It's Israel. Israel takes civilians and fires from behind them. Israel takes civilians when it takes over an apartment building and places the civilians in front of the windows and then fires from behind the civilians. Israel takes civilians and forces them to sit beside tanks. In the case of the West Bank in Gaza, they have no rights. They're basically a helot, a slave population. They're systematically targeting every hospital in Gaza now. I said there are 2,300,000 people living in Gaza, of whom 1,100,000 blades of grass on this lawn, they're children. So when you hear mow the lawn, you have to bear in mind that it's the heads of children that are being mowed.
Let's bear in mind that he literally just implied that Israel is killing millions of children.
Some people don't like the expression concentration camp. Well, you know where I first came across it? In 2004, Giora Island described Gaza. He described it as, quote, a huge concentration camp.
Hold on, hold the phone. Is he actually implying that he hasn't been to Gaza before and he's just relying on what some other guy said? I decided to look it up, and the facts are he hasn't gone to Gaza. In fact, he has been excommunicated from Israel since 2008 because of his support for Hezbollah. I'm going to take it back to Piers Morgan for a second and see what Douglas Murray has to say about it. And please, Douglas, can you give us your opinion? And don't hold back. Let us know how you really feel.
Douglas, your response to that interview?
I've followed the career of Norman Finkelstein for many years. He's notorious for having destroyed his career by, among other things, weaponizing his parents being in the Holocaust to use his career to attack Israel in particular. I think all societies produce a type of sociopath and psychopath, and I do think that Norman Finkelstein is just such a person. If I could give just one example. He repeatedly in that interview referred to Gaza as a concentration camp. Gaza is no such thing as a concentration camp, and Norman Finkelstein knows that very, very well. Every single Jew was removed from Gaza forcibly in 2005 by the Israeli government. In 2006, the people of Gaza had an election and they elected Hamas. Hamas proceeded to kill Fatah and other Palestinians who did not agree with Hamas. And if anyone is responsible for making Gaza into a prison camp, it is Hamas that uses places like the Shifa hospital as torture chambers for Palestinians. Now, here's another oddity about it. He kept saying concentration camp about Gaza. Do you, Piers, know anybody who got out of a concentration camp in 1945 and proceeded to go next door and behead and rape everyone they could find? I don't. But only Norman Finkelstein finds these kinds of comparisons to make, and makes them willfully. And by the way, and shame on him for this, what we just heard was Holocaust denial in real time. He pretends we don't know what happened on the 7th of October. We do know. We do know. It is disgusting that Norman Finkelstein uses his late parents to defame Israel, to pretend that Israel are the Nazis in this situation. All societies produce sick individuals, but very few people have been produced who are quite as sick as Norman Finkelstein.
When he's not going on talk shows and spreading these disgusting lies, he's teaching the blooming, impressionable youth in the college campuses.
Please shut up!
The Jews did not take arms against the
My
Germans!
late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. That I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's being done.
So, in all seriousness, let's try and take a look at how this got started. Where does this come from? And I'd also like to point out that clearly he understands what a concentration camp is.
But my mother was clearly, as with my father, every single member was exterminated. They were alone in the world. And my mother was never able to get over that.
I've met people like that, but I've never met people like that that didn't think of Israel as their salvation.
No, my parents actually, I would say I don't want to use strong words. Let's just say they disliked Israel with an intensity. Originally, Palestinians didn't exist, but once they existed, their feelings of sympathy with the Palestinians, you couldn't, it was an unusual home. My parents were real survivors. Nazi Holocaust was an extremely efficient and assembly line, factory-like extermination of the Jews, which meant very few people survived.
What was their attitude to the creation of the State of Israel?
They had a deep sense of faithfulness. You don't betray friends. The Soviet Union defeated the Nazis. And then when Israel joins with the West in the Cold War, for my parents, that was the ultimate betrayal. But let me tell you something, why it makes me so angry. There were all of these Jewish organizations that were supposed to give you money, and they wouldn't give her a cent. And they were raking in all this cash for themselves and claiming to do it for my parents' suffering. It made me sick, and I had a wrenching experience as a child growing up in that home. So I don't need lessons about how to talk about the Nazi Holocaust.
This is a man who grew up in a household where, as a boy, he had to deal with probably one of the most traumatic things that could ever happen with both of his parents. I can't imagine what that must have been like for him. And not only was it a trauma of what they went through, but also a trauma of a society that turned on his parents, tried to annihilate them, and thought that they were essentially disgusting. It's hard to imagine that the impact of that wouldn't have penetrated him as a young boy. You can see from the way that he talks about these things that not only did he feel betrayed by the state of Israel, but also essentially by Jews themselves. As I see it with what he's doing right now, he's simultaneously trying to save a society from a concentration camp, and so in essence saving his parents, while also killing the thing in him that he hates the most. Unfortunately, through this, Norman Finkelstein, and I hate to use this language, has become king of the Kapos. I thought I would come up with a statement of what I think about a man who could so aggressively and strongly not only betray his people, but go after his people. But then I thought I'd let Norman speak for me in his own words.
When you are a person of power or prominence, and you're using your position to disseminate the ugliest, the stupidest, the most idiotic lies, those people are revolting. They're also revolting cowards and criminals.
And what has it left him with, besides being ostracized and betrayed and essentially alone?
How is your social life? Do you have a good social life?
I don't
You
have
don't
a social life.
You got children? Or a wife? Have you thought about that?
It's too late in the day.
It's hard to know what to say in the face of someone like this who's bringing so much darkness. I guess just remember that we should hold each other close and continue to bring the light. Good Shabbos, everybody. I'm Yisrael Chai.